So I think what you're saying is that in the world that we live in today, you can't just be selling your product. You also need to be selling yourself to your state. All right, so I'm here with Washington State Rep. Josh Penner, who is nice enough to spend some time with us and talk about some of the AI bills that are up right now in session. So, Josh, thanks for being here with us. Do you mind telling us a bit about who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm state representative from North Pierce County and South King County. I might be just about one of the only Republicans that touch King County at this point, but I've been in the Washington State House of Representatives. This is my second year. Came out of local government, also worked in the tech space.
So today on Almost Live, we're going to talk mostly about House Bills 2503 and 2157, two of the many horrible AI bills moving forward this session. These bills are long and convoluted, so I'm going to make it simple for you. House Bill 2503 will make it so that you can't use a frontier LLM in Washington state, and 2157 makes it so that Washington-based startups can't afford to ship AI-powered features to their customers due to punitive compliance and regulatory requirements. How many folks in Olympia are like you, where they've been entrepreneurs, they've been in the workforce, they've worked in tech recently? Where do you stand?
Well, I think there's a good number in Olympia, particularly from our caucus, but that are business owners of some sort or have been in business. There's probably like three intersections in Olympia. There's the lifetime government people. There's people who have been in business, and then there's a third. They're like retired and they're out of work and they're doing stuff, and that's probably good. It gives a good cross section, but as far as coming from even kind of a baseline tech background, it's not really, there's no representation really in Olympia. There might be one or two that has a tech background.
Yeah, and I think what's hard with that too is, I mean, I think sometimes we can be unfair to our legislators where, I mean, how quickly things are moving in product and software development right now, thanks to AI, thanks to Claude Code, thanks to, God, what's it called now? Moltbot. I don't even know what we're calling the agents that are building their own social networks at the moment. You know, if you aren't paying attention about what happened in the past few months, you're completely out of date. So, but much less so, like, it's pretty hard to expect like a legislature to stay up to date. But that being said, that's kind of what we're expecting. So I think at the very least, right, what we're hoping for here is you have some experience in how the real world works, how businesses work, how things evolve over time, how technology impacts business. And that's kind of, you know, I think, is it right to say that that's sort of what we should expect to our politicians? Not that they're the experts, but they're expert thinkers on how these things really, you know, interact with the real world.
Well, I think it's important that we think about, like Steve Jobs, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he said the systems around you, everything that you do was built by people who are no smarter than you. And one thing that we need to know about legislators is that they're all fundamentally flawed in the fact that no one has perfect vision outside of their scope of genius. You know, you kind of hit it on the head as technology is moving so quick that, you know, the technology we use to craft and build legislation is, you know, for most legislators, that's kind of their touch point on what technology means. They look at, you know, a life cycle of 20 years to change how they do work. And it's shocking how quickly things have moved. I certainly can share with you some insights there, but I just know that some of the work that I did a couple years ago around GovTech, you know, I can rebuild in less than a weekend utilizing Codex and AI. And I did it prior to this session because I needed a tool to keep track of, you know, 1,500 bills. You know, if we're talking about AI bills, you've got a number 2157 and 2503, which I'm sure we'll talk about. They were introduced this year, but then there's 1170, which is carrying over from last year, which is a very problematic bill as well. And so your universe of bills to consider is probably about 3,000 bills almost.
Yep. Good Lord. Yeah. So I do want to talk about those two bills, but before that, I mean, I think the framing that I want to bring to this is not one of, you know, just complaining and talking heads shouting about like the roof is falling, we're screwed. I think what I want to talk about here is ways that, you know, maybe we can help educate folks, impact these bills and what we can do. Because, you know, ultimately when I shared with the foundation's community what these bills look like, the immediate reaction of folks was like, who's putting these forward? Like, it's a bunch of Luddites. And my reaction was to be a Luddite, that means you had to have, worked in the first place. And here it seems like it's less about people who have done something a specific way and are afraid of technology that's going to cause a new way of working. But, some folks who have never really been in the workforce, have never really used tech as part of their jobs, and are ending up being the ones kind of driving this legislation. So I think with that, my question is, where are the insights coming from to the people who are proposing the AI bills? I imagine it's not from them like you playing with codecs, talking to people. Where are they getting these ideas about what needs to be legislated and why?
Well, you've heard the term special interests. All legislation comes from conversations that people have with somebody. I think if you take this at a very basic level, AI and kind of emergent intelligence is it's starting to slap us in the face, and a lot of us fear we're going to get punched in the face, whether it's a complete change in how we do work or a displacement of work or whatever your fears of the future might be. At the same time, if you have no connection to how this stuff may come to be, the people who are speaking to you of your fears and telling you how to solve them are going to tell you the solution. So most bills, as you start to generate a bill, they come from a problem that you perceive or want to fix, whether it's real or not. And if you've got somebody that has a fancy degree, whispering in your ear, we need to regulate, or do these things, it looks like a solution, whether or not you understand the problem entirely. And so I think that's kind of what you see with some of these bills that are, they have maybe even like a reasonable intent, but the way they go about fixing it doesn't just seem to be grounded in reality, because I just don't think they're stakeholdered very well.
Why don't we start here with 2503? So 2503 in my research looks like it's modeled after the bill that kind of just went into effect in California about a month ago around AI training data. And I'm curious, what is your take on why we're pushing that bill forward? Like, this is a controversial bill that is already mired in a bunch of lawsuits in California. Folks are unclear about how this is going to go. Will you tell us a little bit about the bill and how we got here?
So is my understanding of the bill, right? It's kind of like this nutrition label idea. We should know what's going into these models. And it kind of carries with it this idea of perceived bias. If bad information goes in, bad information is going to come out. That itself, I think, is a biased opinion. But this is a good example of an idea that has, I think, a truthy sounding intent. Like, we should know the information that's in these things and why we're getting outputs. But the devil's in the details as far as how it manifests itself, right? It requires you to go back multiple years to provide the secret sauce, the ingredients. It makes no differentiation between a small startup or a $1 trillion company. And so this is, I think, an idea, like I was trying to indicate earlier, where you have something that sounds like it makes sense. Like, we should know what goes into our models to see what output we're getting. That being said, it falls apart under scrutiny, like a number of these bills.
Got it. Yeah, because you do wonder where these things end. But you also look at this bill, and I just gotta say, like, the energy, the fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that people are thinking about, like, holy crap, are the implications of this that the code that I write these days using Claude Code, Cursor, Codex, whatever, are they just going to say, like, hey, people in Washington State, you just don't really get to use this anymore if these are the expectations of your state, or you don't get to use the state-of-the-art models until we're done months later? Like, it certainly seems like this bill, if implemented, will largely just lead to, like, this doesn't work at all. And so it has me wondering, like, what are these people thinking in the first place about this being a priority for the state versus just about anything else that we can do that has a real impact?
Well, why it exists is, I'm not sure yet. I certainly have tried to amend these bills along the way, because it's got two carve-outs, one for government, one for, I think, federally recognized tribes. and trying to amend the bills along the way, you just get this this gaslight response of we're not sure people are able to do this. There's no technological capability at the state. The state will never build their own AI system. All this stuff that makes no sense. But that's where we are in the pressure of Olympia as the gaslight starts to come out everywhere. My suspicion is that somewhere along the way, somebody's pushing policy that they're not sure is implementable, but doing so for a larger regulatory push at some point.
Yeah, and it feels like a bunch of, I guess you sort of covered it. It's posturing. It's part of some other strategy rather than thinking about what is in the best interest of the citizens of Washington and where should we be spending our money. But look, like the audience here, the people at foundations, these are all startup founders. So like this bill, we look at this, we're like, okay, this will be a problem in 2027. I hope that I'm even still in business then. So like, I'm not going to care about that. On the AI bill front, there's 2157, which is about using AI in decision making, which, as we've had people in the community go through this bill, they've largely torn it apart because when you think about what enterprise software, really any software to a business does, is there's business logic. You codify what humans did in software. It can be if-then statements, other decisions. Suddenly using an LLM as a judge rather than some other heuristic becomes this regulated thing. Where the line is, it's kind of unclear. But it sounds like what folks are looking for here is kind of this level of regulation and transparency that frankly doesn't really exist anywhere else. Like as an early stage startup, you deal with things like SOC 2 compliance, HIPAA compliance, which cost you a ton of money and drown you in paperwork most of the time where it doesn't matter. This thing, in some ways, feels like it's a complete blocker for many companies to even, build in the state of Washington. But where I want to go with this and where I want your feedback is, I have deep concerns that this one's going to go through because when I think historically about the state, if I'm a larger company, if I'm Amazon, if I'm Microsoft, what I'm essentially saying is like, this bill is stupid, but we already have a team who deals with this and we can afford it. So we're going to fight on some other front. And I'm super worried that bills like this will go through. What advice do you have to the entrepreneurial community about what do we do with increasing bills that look like this?
Well, engagement is important. And I'm glad to see that you're engaged. So like these are two bills we're talking about, but there's another bill, 2225, that if you gross more than 100,000, then you're going to be chopped off at the kneecaps. You're going to have to spend 20,000 just to be in compliance with the requirements of that bill. So how does that make sense? What can you do is you get engaged like this, have conversations. I think what's important is that you tell real stories because, a legislator may not know the difference between machine learning, AI, or some other deployment of technology. But if you say, look, I built a toothbrush that connects to an app, and this is going to make it so I can't do that. Do you really want to create a bill that looks at frontier models the same way it looks at AI connected toothbrushes? It doesn't make any sense. And so here's how we can fix it, or fundamentally say, look, this bill doesn't make sense. Next year, as you're working on policy, because it is important that we have some sort of predictable regulatory framework so that way people can innovate within an understandable bound, right? Like everything's about de-risking. So let's de-risk the regulatory framework. Make sure that it's informed by all aspects of the community of developers, those that work at trillion-dollar companies in Redmond and those that are scrappy startups out of a founder's lab. Politics is the land of perverse incentives. You think about what's right for the community around me and then what's right for my district and concentric circles. There's that old saying, all politics is local. But there's problems with that with any kind of revolution of technology. On the side, I think we talked a little bit about it, that if you're Detroit in 1940, everything's great. But if you're locked into that perverse incentive that maximize the industry that builds your community, you might miss the bigger picture. And that's where we are with AI, or this particular aspect of the technology revolution that we're in, is that we can implement all sorts of policy. We can regulate it to the point where nothing happens here in the future. No builders decide to plant their flag here, and the world's going to move on. AI is the future. It is going to integrate itself into every aspect of our work, and I suspect you, like me, is kind of a maximalist in this. And even though I can replace the amount of work I did in a weekend a couple years ago, I'm busier than I've ever been. The risk here is certainly fear-based policy that ends up regulating ourselves out of opportunities and growth in Washington State. If we didn't have the technology sector in Washington, we'd have the same GDP as Mississippi. And so, that I think is something that shocks people. What are we without technology? We're a great state that has world-class agriculture.
You want to hear a fun fact there? That takes me back to my time in Olympia last week, where coincidentally, who's one of those few states that doesn't have QSBS? Mississippi. So maybe that's just where we're headed.
That being said, their education system's gone from 50th to like 4th. So we could probably do a little bit better on that side. But there's a universe of policy we talk about in Olympia.
I gotta say, I thank you for the work that you do for your constituents and for listening to folks in other communities, because I would just say that a lot of us in the entrepreneurial community, as we look at all of the bills that are being put forward here, we say to ourselves, does this state even want us here anymore? And it's because of folks like you that we hear the answers yes. We may not be the loudest voice yet, we may not be the majority, but we're fighting for you. So thank you for taking the time and coming on and doing the work that you do.